Hey there, welcome back to Writer and Geek. And I know that we have been away for a long time, almost 2 months now since our last episode. But this episode is about what happened to us during those 2 months. And believe me, it's not good. And this is going to be a little different episode, and it's not going to be the general rambling between Shankar and I. This is going to be an episode where we sit down and talk with someone very special. None other than the producer of chart-topping podcast, the Indian Noir, Nikesh Murali. Nikesh is an acclaimed voice actor with a lot of awards and credits to his name, and he's also the producer of Indian Noir. If you have not listened to Indian Noir, I think you're missing out a lot. We'll put the links to his show and his website in the show notes. Do give a listen to this episode where we talk about horror and the history of horror and why human beings are so fascinated with horror. And trust me, there are a lot of life experiences which are being discussed in this episode, so you would find it interesting. And somewhere down the line in this episode, we also hear a narrative about what happened to the writer and the geek. So give this episode a listen. I hope you enjoy it. And this episode being a very long episode, we have split it into 2 parts. So we are releasing the part 1 today, and the next part will come out next week. And as always, thank you so much for your support and enjoy this episode. I'll see you at the end of this. So Nikesh, thank you so much for joining us today. This has been a great pleasure having you on the show. So would you want to start with, introducing who you are and what you do and stuff like that?
Sure. Thank you for having me, guys. And look, this is very exciting to be on the show, to be on India's premium popular culture podcast, The Writer and the Geek Show. And look, I feel like Indian Noir has peaked. And for those of you who don't know what Indian Noir is a storytelling podcast. It's India's most popular adult storytelling podcast, and it covers horror and crime stories. And I am Nikesh Murali. If you don't know me, I've been professionally writing for 15 years. I then went off writing. I did other things in my life, got into voice acting, and then that really took off. And I thought, you know what, how about I go back and pursue my love for writing and telling stories? So the two came together in the form of Indian Noir. And it's been a wonderful journey with regards to the podcast in terms of listener numbers and feedback and the critical acclaim. And that's brought me to the show, talking to both of you.
That's amazing, Nikesh. It's always great to be able to do things that you really want to do in life. And I think you have put us in a really high pedestal.
Yeah. I think the roof will be blown off.
We don't mind a little bit of help from your side anyway, that we accept whatever you said.
Yeah,
and the feeling is mutual as well.
But look, I have to be extra nice to you guys, because people who are listening to this who are not aware of this, I had invoked both Vishnu and Shankar as characters in an episode of season 1 of Fear FM, which is the horror story on Indian Noir, and taken them on a bike journey and then brutally murdered them. I mean, it was terrible. Some people, I think, wept at the sounds of Vishnu being squished to pulp. So I've been extra nasty to them. So I'm going to take this opportunity to be extra nice to them. In fact, I'm so happy that you've decided to invite me to the podcast.
That's awesome. And we are going to play that clip in sometime. So keep, listening to this episode. We are going to put that clip out for you all to listen. And I did share that episode with few of my friends, and they had little difficulty looking at my face afterwards. They were like, dude, you know what? Every time I look at you, I remember that episode and whatever happened to you.
And yeah, if you haven't already figured out, that's the reason why you are on the show.
Yes, great. This is what I should do. Kill more Indian podcasters on the show.
So we'll delve deeper into your storytelling and the way you conceptualize all these stories and the way you come up with these characters and the way to brutally murder them and all that stuff a little later in the podcast. But you being into the horror genre, right? We want to talk a little bit about why horror is such an interesting subject for people, and why human beings are always associated with something that is horrifying, right? So I think we'll start a conversation from there, and then move into the different aspects of horror and how horror is there in the culture around us and in movies and stuff like that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I think a good starting point for us would be just to talk about why horror would have penetrated its way into human life. And if you think quite simply about it, as an early human in an unknown world without the aid of science, your ancestors pass away, and it's difficult for you to process things like death. And it's easy. You can see how easily you would create these constructs that they have gone on another journey, that they are in another plane, that they might be able to reach out to you. So these varying levels of wish fulfillment that would exist in these stories that would have created the early seeds of horror. And you see that very clearly in the stories about ancient cultures. A lot of the Abrahamic and Egyptian mythology, as you're aware, have these stories about the dead journeying across the river or journeying into another plane from whence they are able to reach out to us. So from very early on, that would have been the sort of domain. Does that sound like something that would have been the trigger for you guys as well?
Okay.
Oh, Nikesh, you know what? Shankar and I have our jaws dropped down to the floor.
I am actually looking at Vishnu and making a WTF sign. I'm like, this is like a eureka moment, you know?
Exactly. We have never thought about horror in the
Yeah.
way that you just mentioned, because although we talk a lot about ghosts and whatever, all the other stuff, right? We never thought about this kind of, this is the origin of how horror got into human life, and the way you have just described it, I think that is actually the perfection that you cannot you cannot describe it any better. I think that is
Yeah.
how it exactly started.
I think to add to it, like, we both have been more into, the scientific side of everything. So we have not really believed in paranormal activities and all that because of that.
Yeah.
So we have never seen it from that perspective, which you just explained. And it's just so brilliant,
Yeah. So as you said, it's true that at least in the early days, whatever human being cannot explain, because science was nowhere, right? There is no scientific proof. There was no science at all. That is when everybody got into paranormal activities and all the supernatural things to start explaining about how things worked in this nature, right?
Yeah.
Even if it is rain, when people didn't know where is rain coming from, we always thought that Indra or some other god from the sky. He's just showering water on us, something like that.
Yeah, that brings me to something I had read about a few weeks back. Like, it's about an African tribe which believes that the aeroplanes which pass through their land, it's like some godly thing.
Wow.
Because they don't have an explanation about what it is, right?
There's a movie called Gods Must Be Crazy,
Yes,
also, right?
yes,
I mean,
yes.
they get a bottle and they start believing that is
Yeah.
God. So so what you just described, it's just blown our mind.
I'm curious, coming from what you were saying, like, so going from those sort of early belief systems, you can see how that would have then immersed or merged with classical storytelling. So, like, if you look at the Greek myths, you would see lots of monsters like the Hydra, Cyclops, and similarly, Indian mythology has those elements as well, which are a bit horrifying. So have you guys not encountered it in Indian mythology in terms of your life in India, the horror elements that are in there?
Oh, I would say that since the time that we were born, I think we have encountered all these stories as children. Now we are probably at a place where we have an understanding of how things work. But I still remember when we were small, right? It usually starts from your parents or your grandparents, right? They have all these fantastic stories about how there is good and evil tries to lead you down the path of bad things, and you should always be praying to God so that you are kept away. So there are these regional gods and demigods with all this evil superpower and all those kind of things. And we were brought up partly in Kerala, and Kerala is a land with many different deities and superstitions and all those kind of things. The society is it's an amalgamation of all these kind of things, right? So as we grew up, there were all these even every single temple had a history behind it. And if you go to a temple, you'll see good and evil. Let me give you an example. So we are from a city called Thrissur in Kerala.
Yeah.
It's known as the cultural capital of India, of Kerala, and lot of temples. It's known for the number of temples that the city has. It's called Thrissur because there are 3 Shiva temples, famous Shiva temples also, and
Yeah.
one of them, the most.
I think one of the names is Trishiva Perur, isn't it? Thrissur is Trishiva
Yeah.
Perur. Yeah.
Trishva
Yes.
Perur is a real name
Yeah.
because there are 3 Shivas. And now that got shortened during the British time and it became Trishur now.
Right.
So one of the temples called Vadakunada temple, right? It's in the center of the city, and people are discouraged from going near the temple at night because they say that you hear strange sounds of someone hitting something with a hammer, kind of a thing. The story surrounding that is that since we are all in Kali Yuga right now, according to Hindu mythology, there is a stone which grows in size. And that stone is visible. If you go to the temple, you can see the stone, and you can see some marks on top of the stone, like if someone has hit the stone with some heavy object.
Right.
So the story goes like Shiva comes out every night in an effort to try and prevent Kali from growing in this age. He tries to hit the stone and reduce the height of the stone. So the effect of Kali is directly proportional to the height of the stone.
That's incredible. I didn't know that about the Vadakanathan temple. That's an incredible story. And just you saying that reminded me, and because I part of my childhood was spent in Kerala as well. I had this sudden mental image of my great aunt when we used to have power cuts and we see flames going across the fields. She would tell me that's all the Madanmar are traveling across the fields. There are these, 10-foot giants that are going on a procession through the paddy fields to climb up on the rocks to look across their empire. When you said that story, it reminded me of that.
Yeah, I think a part of that was also to keep the kids safe as well, right? I mean, not necessarily from the evil of supernatural, probably from other stuff like wild animals or falling into a pit or something, like, so that they don't go out late at night. So they came up with all these crazy stories and stuff.
Absolutely, yeah, and that's the trademark of early horror too. Like it serves as a warning to prevent you from going into certain places after dark, because you are likely to be either hurt by animals or the state of the treacherous geography there. So you have all these horror stories about the grove that early humans would have perpetrated. And some of them are directly linked to power structures in society. When the priestly class wanted to become more powerful, they needed a tool to wield. And while they have religion to bring people in line, it's horrifying tales that would really prevent someone from challenging them. So, just as you rightly pointed out, they would have served as warnings. And the thing with horror stories and children, it's, the collection, it's got such a major connection. The Grimm's fairy tales, a lot of the stories that you were mentioning, like the one that my great aunt would have told me when I was a child, they're all about preventing terrible accidents or any bad events from occurring when a child goes out to play in the woods.
That's right. And I think another purpose that these, devil and all those kind of negative, heroes or forces played is that they made the heroes look better. And they say, right, every hero needs a villain. So unless you have something horrifying, you cannot show the god or the hero in their true glory, right? I mean, if evil doesn't exist, there is no use for good to exist as well.
Reminds me of MI too.
I love that movie, by the way. I just love MI too.
I think that is our favorite movie as well.
It was so cheesy and wonderful, and the action's great. But I think more than the duality of horror, what's happened over a period of time is it's become complex through literature and art and movies. And I think two things that I'll talk about today that's influenced me as a writer and a storyteller that would eventually go on to make podcasts on this topic would be my experience with it in literature. So I did a bachelor's in literature. That was my first bachelor's that I did. And so that really helped me engage with literature in general, but also horror literature in particular. So the term horror first comes into play in the 1764 novel called The Castle of Otranto. And it is then taken on by writers like Anne Radcliffe and Matthew Gregory Lewis, who wrote The Monk. And it's in this elemental stage. So this duality thing that we are talking about. But then it just really has this explosion in terms of its quality. So the first great horror classic really is Frankenstein by Mary Shelley. Have you guys read or watched Frankenstein as a movie?
I think I have read. I have not completely read the book. I think we had that book in the library, and I have read a little bit of it. But I've watched some animated series about Frankenstein, but I'm not sure how much it actually relates to the true story.
I've watched one of the silent film era movie of Frankenstein, and
nice.
A lot of animated stuff. Yeah.
And it's it's very culturally influential, so it comes into play a lot. But there you can see how this duality of the god versus demon is changing, and it becomes more about the evil that human beings can perpetrate when they inherit science as a power. This doctor chooses to use the powers to reanimate a corpse. So that's the true horror there. And what goes on from there is the growth of atmospheric horror. So post that, writers like Mary Shelley, writers like Emily Bront and Nathaniel Hawthorne, they start to use horror to discuss the atmosphere of those things. So Arthur Conan Doyle's written some works, Robert Louis Stevenson, if you want to look at the early history of it. But really, the two, I think, try and engage with Frankenstein. It's incredible. But the two stories that I'd recommend are Henry James's Turn of the Screw, and then going on from there, everyone's favorite, Bram Stoker's Dracula. That's where we really see it peaking. It moves away from the duality to these complex relationships that people have with each other.
Right. That's right. I mean, Dracula is something that I don't remember when was the first time I heard about Dracula, but because it's something that you kind of grew up with, right? Knowing that Dracula is one of the most evil characters in literature and all that. I've had opportunity to read the book, and it really scared me out. I think that was the first time I actually read something and got scared. I usually, you watch movies, you see things, you get scared, but the book really frightened me out when I was little young.
I'm curious about that. I'm curious about how, and I'd like to hear from both of you about your reading experience with horror. Like, what have you read? How has it affected you? And then I'll go and talk about how it's affected me.
All right, I think I'll start first. So I was this kind of a guy who used to read a lot when I was a kid. Not so much right now, but I used to go into my school library and find out those kind of books which no other kids usually read. Others preferred all these little books like which has these cartoon characters
Hardy
and
Boys.
stuff like Hardy Boys, Nancy Drew, and all that. But I preferred more like thrillers and horror stuff and all that. And most of the books which I've read, they're not by famous authors also. I think there are some of these small gems, some of Indian authors also. So one of the books which, as I mentioned, which I read during that time was Dracula, because I've heard a lot about it and different versions of the story as well, right? There are a lot of custom versions of Dracula as well. And I have not watched any movies. I had not watched any movie at that point. So I got this book. I usually sit and watch the moment I reach home, taking breaks only for eating and other stuff. I'm kind of a person who likes to finish the book as soon as possible. I don't keep it for later, that kind of a thing, right? The reading experience was it was like incredible. So the thing with reading is which I usually prefer is as you're reading through the pages, right, and as you see the characters and their descriptions, you have this mental image that you create about the surroundings and the location and the kind of people they are and the way they look, right? And since it's your creation, you can create them as you want. This is the reason I feel many times when books are made into movies and series and stuff, people tend to get disappointed, right, with the casting choices and stuff like that. And that has happened with me as well. I have not been happy about some of the casting choices because you have these images created in your mind, and when you see something else filling that space, you're like, this is not how I imagined how it should be. So I used to read this book the moment I reach home, and as the day moved into nighttime, it started getting creepier and creepier, right? Because then you start imagining you want to go to the bathroom. You think that, okay, I just read this portion where this particular thing is coming from the behind the shadows. If I go to the bathroom right now, what if something like that is waiting for me there? So you start creating these mental images of these kind of things. But there was a thrill in that as well, right? Sleeping at night might not be that you won't get good sleep, but I used to love that adrenaline flow that came with reading these kind of horror books and stuff like that. So that's my reading experience. I never enjoyed watching as much as I used to enjoy reading.
And Vishnu, yours? What was your experience like?
That was Vishnu.
Oh, sorry, I got both of you mixed up again. Sorry, Shankar, what was your experience?
Yeah, so similarly, I started with Dracula, and the first time I read that was in the Malayalam version of it in Balarama. I'm not sure if you've heard about Balarama.
Yeah, I used to read Balarama too, but there was Dracula in Balarama.
Yes.
I think this was during early to mid 2000s.
2001.
That's awesome.
Yeah. So that's how I started reading, and I think that's the first novel I've read. And then from there on, I think I jumped to Sherlock Holmes, The Hound of Baskerville. That kind of scared me.
Hound of Baskerville is another one. I think I'll come to that later.
Yeah, and so that's how I started out. But then I lost interest, and then I got back into not horror. It was more of a gore kind of stuff where I started reading a lot about serial killers and all that. I was very much, I'm still very fascinated with that. And that's how I enjoyed, the process of, a little bit of horror and all that. And one more thing. Yeah. Probably 3 years back, I started listening to these creepy pasta kind of stuff. And there is this channel called Cop's Husband. I'm not sure if you've heard about it.
It's a YouTube channel.
Right. Yeah.
So, he used to put out some great stuff about horror kind of all these kind of stories, and that what I used to do was before going to bed, instead of listening to some ASMR kind of stuff, I used to listen to this.
I can't believe I didn't take you for an ASMR fan. I can't believe it.
You know what? I think coming out of closet right now, we both like it.
It's happened, guys. Look, if nothing comes out of this podcast, you are absolutely bored by the sound of my voice. At least I've managed to, get these two guys to confess that they are ASMR fans.
I think you would make a brilliant ASMR artist.
I know, you could do that.
People actually say that my poetry readings actually are a bit ASMR-ish. So that people do listen to that, as an ASMR alternative. So yes, there's some merit to what you're saying.
Right. How about starting another channel?
Adding another channel. I mean, I wouldn't know what sounds to make. Right. So you see, can you? I know we are now going off topic, but what counts?
That's the style of this podcast, right? I'll tell you what kind of sounds you can make. The sound of demon's nail scratching against the door, or something like that.
And it would put people to sleep. Really?
Right. And the demon coming and whispering in the ears.
Yeah. So. I'm an ASMR guy because I have a lot of trouble sleeping. So it kind of helps me.
You'll have trouble getting girls from tomorrow, dude. You're done.
I don't care. I just want to get good sleep. That's
he just wants to sleep. No, I think girls would appreciate it. Girls would appreciate the fact that you're a man who looks after your health, and that you then catches up on your 8 hours of sleep by listening to something. But that's just profound.
Yeah. So I started listening to creepypasta kind of stuff rather than ASMR. And there are a lot of true stories and stuff that which are fiction. And that really fascinated me, especially stories where, people just go for a walk in the woods at night and they have someone following them, One story especially was a girl, she's staying at her grandparents' place, and every day she used to go for a 2-mile walk or something. It would take half an hour, and she smokes up and walks. Okay, and she felt like someone's following her, and the whole story is about how she got back, and it took a walk which usually takes her half an hour, took her 7 hours to
yeah.
So that kind of stuff really fascinated me. So that's the kind of horror which I like.
Yeah, and look, it's very interesting from both of your reading experiences. Mine's very similar in that I was exposed to some of those classics you're talking about as a kid as well, especially in abridged forms like Hand of Baskerville or Dracula. But I think my earliest sort of I'll talk about movies separately because that's been a big influence. But we are now sticking to literature, and
Right.
even as a kid, movies was such a big impact on me. But talking about literature, I think the start of it was this distant relative of mine, Molly Chechi. Whenever I used to go on holidays to my grandfather's, and she used to read those weekly magazines that were such a hit in Kerala. So like the Manala Manorama magazine, Mangalam, yes, all those magazines. And if you remember them, they always have 2-page stories. That's it. They are serialized, but they are just 2 pages. So in a way, Indian Noir is an attempt to replicate those things. They are short, they're very punchy, they are tremendous. And Maurizio used to tell me these stories. Some of them involved, black magic, and because Kerala has such a rich mythology of black magic, it's always terrifying about what these black magicians could conjure with their magic. And but going from there, so I always loved those stories. I loved all the Indian mythology that my grandfather used to tell me that had some horror tinge to it. But also going forward, what happened to me in terms of reading was, like you guys, getting exposed to abridged versions of some of those classical hits by Edgar Allan Poe and Bram Stoker, obviously. But then when I finished, when I was post high school and I had gone through my Hardy Boys phase, and I got this membership to the Ailur Library in Trivandrum, and that was such a landmark moment in my life. In that people there did not really restrict children from taking books that were inappropriate for them home. So I've read all these salacious novels full of sex and violence, and also got exposed to horror quite early on. And my favorite then and still continues to be Stephen King, who I think is the best horror writer, especially in short form stories and novellas. I've read a lot of British writers like Ramsey Campbell, Clive Barker, and James Herbert, and they've written some amazing books. So if you're taking note of these names, go and read their works. It's very classical. It's very traditional horror. It packs a punch. And so really, just devoured those books and loved to live in the world. I don't remember being particularly scared by them. I just felt this inherent thrill at reading these stories and all these magical sort of horrifying constructs that they're conjured up. I won't talk much about modern horror because I don't really read a lot, but after I went through all those writers that I mentioned, which I continue to read, like Stephen King, I still read him now. What I did was I went and I read some of the classical writers, and these writers are not well known, but please take note of them, because if you're looking for atmospheric horrors, like the one that Shankar just mentioned with regards to the creepypasta experience he had, there's Ambrose Bierce, Arthur Machen, Algernon Blackwood, and of course H.P. Lovecraft. And what they did was they took the focus away from the monster, but focused more on the creepiness of it. So, like what you were saying before, the 7-hour walk. How creepy is that? It should take 1 hour, but it took 7 hours.
That was I've gone back and made Vishnu listen to it. It was like that impactful.
Yeah, that's nice. I think that is the same thing that actually made this Hound of Baskerville is very interesting to me. If you look at it, there is no demon, there is no gore or any kind of stuff in that. The only thing that creeps you out is the absence of the source, which we are trying to find out. What is the source of this, and what is the source of all these howling noises and stuff like that. So I think Conan Doyle really creates a atmosphere, right? I mean, talking about the moon and the way the moon shines over the moon and all this howling wind noises and the Baskerville Hall, it paints a picture in your mind. Like you literally feel that you are, you are sitting with Watson there and looking out of the window, expecting something to come out. So that I started preferring those kind of horror stories, those kind of horror movies as well. Rather than the stuff which shows more gore and talks about demons and stuff like that.
I
That's-
think
If you love that, then you will love some of the authors that I've mentioned, because I'm trying to think. Arthur Machen in particular, there are these creepy stories about people going and visiting someone who's their relative, and every time they go and visit this person, that person changes slightly. The house changes its shape slightly. The objects within it change their nature of their existence changes slightly, and this sort of existential dread starts creeping into you because you don't understand what's going on. And not understanding what's going on, I think, creeps people out the most. When you can examine something, when you can look behind the curtain and find what it is, then everything's revealed. Or even if there is a potential. But the great thing about some of these stories that we're talking about, you never find out what's going on.
Exactly. I think when we start talking about movies, one of the movies which is in the similar lines, what was that movie? 1708? What is it?
Oh yes,
1807?
1408 or
John
something.
Cusack. Yeah,
Stephen King story. Yeah,
It's a Stephen King story, is it?
Yeah,
I didn't know that. So that story is in the same thing, right? I mean, there is no apparent ghost, or there's no gore or something, but the horror in that is the person gets stuck there, and there is no way that he's able to come out of that room. That is the kind of horror, right?
Yeah.
And after watching that movie, personally, I've thought that at times you get these thoughts, right? I'm like, what if I get stuck in such a thing where being killed and I'm being reborn again endlessly, like infinite number of times, without being able to escape from that. It's like
That's right.
kind of a maddening situation, right?
I mean, we have nightmares like that, but going beyond that, we also create personal health in our personality through that. We have these thought loops that sometimes we cannot escape. So, stories like that are just a manifestation of those things. That's the great thing about horror. It's a great way to discuss how we exist in the modern world. The real things that are going to harm us. So let's admit it. Like you and I, we are not going to get killed by a werewolf or a vampire if we step out of the house. It'll most likely be a truck coming from interstate where the guy's been drunk and he's run over us and he maims us, and we are trapped in this bed forever and ever and ever, and nobody loves us anymore. And we can't have sex, and nobody, and we have to shit in a diaper for the rest of our life. Exactly. And to live that life across 50, 60 years till we die, that is true horror.
Okay, I'm out. Oh my God.
and that also takes me to these some of these very, very short stories also, right?
Yeah.
I have read, I don't clearly remember how the story goes, but it is something along the lines of, let's say, suddenly you open your eyes and you find yourself buried in a coffin, and you can hear the sound of people throwing mud or dirt or whatever it is to cover your coffin. You are awake, but you're not able to do anything because you're dead. So that kind of, it's such a scary thought. What if when you're dead, you're conscious about everything that is happening around you, but you cannot do anything about it, and you are meant to spend eternity buried in a coffin, or put into the fire or something like that. That kind of stories are also something that I really like to read.
Are you aware of the concept of night terrors?
No.
If you're not, then let me give you a bit of a background on it. So some people have this condition. I don't know if you would call it a condition, but it could be temporary. It could last for a long time, wherein they are unable to sleep. They wake up, they are frozen, and they see the shadowy thing. Yeah. I'm pretty sure everyone's experienced it at some level, but for some people, it's like an illness. It's every night they see this. It's terrifying, and they have to go on this long treatment protocol to cure them. So I think
it's also called sleep paralysis or something like that.
Correct. Right? That's exactly right. It is sleep paralysis. Yeah. And one of the segments that I included in the first season of Fear FM actually came from my personal experience of that, because years ago I was living in Queensland, in Northern Australia. I was going to university there, and like a lot of uni students, I used to be a night owl. And one night I decided I was going to look into the Black Dahlia murder case. It's the infamous murder case in Los Angeles. A lot of you might know this. They've made movies about this. There's a recent TV show what was it called? I can't remember the name now. It'll come to me a bit later. But it's a famous case. And what happened was this young woman who was coming to LA to be an actress, she got into a car, and then they found her the next day. All her body parts were chopped up and separated, and she had what they call a Glasgow grin, which is being cut from one end of the cheek to the other, like a smile.
The Joker.
The Joker smile, exactly. And, that's how her body was found. And there's been lots of theories about who did it. And, it's a horrifying case. Anyway, I decided to look into that. And then I read extensively about it, read the postmortem reports, looked at the photos of the crime scene, looked at the photos of the body. And then I decided to go to sleep. And then an hour and a half into that, I woke up. I had sleep paralysis. And I had the image of this woman chopped up, only that she's joined in the bits that she was chopped up, as if she was sutured together. She had the big Glasgow grin, and she climbed up the bed right on top of me and put her face right next to me.
So how real was it? Did you? So I see. I have not had this experience. The reason I'm asking is I've read about a lot of sleep paralysis experiences that people have put in Reddit and all the other places. Right?
Yeah.
There was because I've also heard some people say that you can actually get into sleep paralysis state if you want voluntarily.
Yeah.
What basically happens is your brain is awake and the brain is sent a signal to your body to be asleep or something like that.
Yeah.
So that is the reason you're not able to move your limbs don't get the signal or something.
Yeah.
So what I want to know is how real did you think that experience was?
Look, it's so real that now that I'm talking to you about this, my body's gone rigid at the memory of it. So it was just like enduring a real trauma. It was incredibly real. It lasted for hours. I kid you not. I would have experienced that for at least 2 hours straight. I could not move. I kept looking around the room, trying to avoid this sight in front of my eyes. The creature would move from top of my body to the corner of the room and then back again. And even when I'd managed to completely wipe out the visual, it was there in the room. And that was worse. The fact that I couldn't see it was worse.
Right. So when you say it climbed on your body, you can actually feel the sensations, right? You feel heavy on your chest and all that kind of stuff.
Right. Yeah, you see the thing crawling, the bed sheet compressing around you, the sheets being pulled across your body. It's fingers pushing into your muscle and your flesh. It coming directly on top of you. It's breath on you. You feel all of that.
So it's at that stage it becomes really difficult to kind of differentiate whether it's really happening or is it something that you're just dreaming or something, right?
Correct. Yeah, it is like that because your logic kind of intercedes and says, this can't be real. But everything that you're seeing in front of your eyes and you're experiencing says otherwise. Not to mention that you've gone completely paralyzed and you feel paralysis. Do you know what I mean? Like, just like you have the ability to move and you sense that, the inability to move is also a sensation. And that just weighs you down so much that it is so real. It's terrifying. I really don't know how people live with that day in and day out. And there's some amazing documentaries on YouTube about it. It's crazy.
Yeah, that's where I think I got introduced to this concept, this thing as well. And I'm sure that it's not just those 2 hours. Even after waking up next day morning, you would have thought about it a lot.
Oh, totally. To this day, I think about it. I mean, I'm talking to you about this right now. So, that's how much of an impact it's had. And it's, obviously filtered into what I write as well. So I've always wanted to put that sequence in. So very early on the first season of Fear FM, I thought that's the best way to introduce the monster in it. And in that, I did not fully reveal the monster. I chose to go with the dark, shadowy shapes that people with night terror generally tend to experience. It's not often as graphic as the one that I saw. Because I knew more people would have experienced that version of a night terror versus the version that I saw. And, I think like that episode, there was lots of reactions to it. That was very interesting. You just don't realize how prevalent this thing is. And it tends to disappear. Some people have it when they're like in their high school years, some people in their university years. I had this one experience when I was, in my early 20s and then never had it. but I remember having them when I was in my high school years for an year or so. But it's different for different people.
So, have you ever had the fear to go to sleep after this?
No.
Thinking that.
No, I
Oh
struggle
man.
with sleeping not because of the night terror experience or my general fear of ghosts. I just struggle with sleeping because it's usually 2 minutes before I'm about to close my eyes that I'll have an amazing idea. Oh, I need to do, yeah, that's when I usually get my plot ideas, or what do I do at work tomorrow, or what do I do for next weekend. See, that's what I mean. That is the true horror. It's not these terrifying things. It's our existential behaviors.
Right. I think before we move on to the movies, horror in movies and stuff, now that
Yeah.
we're discussing a little bit personal about your stuff, right? Why don't we touch about a little bit about how do you get these ideas and how you come up with these concepts and characters, and especially the thing that I'm really interested to know is
Yeah.
how do you come up with this innovative ways of killing off your characters?
Yeah, sure.
Especially with our episode, right? I mean, you did a tremendous job in killing us, and I think this is the right time to play that episode as well. So
Yeah. So I'll explain how I came to the idea of your particular episode, and then it'll be a nice way to segue into that segment. I totally agree. But talking more about, so most of the writing that I've been doing over the last 15 years, I started writing poetry. I wrote literary fiction, which had nothing to do with genre elements like crime or horror. It was usually about social issues facing people who live in the fringe in India, and people, prostitutes, people who are homeless, drug addicts, people who are from lower castes who are persecuted, religious violence in India. Those are the things that I wrote about for years and won awards for or published books in. And it's once that wasn't very satisfying that I moved to writing genre fiction. And that's how I wrote His Night Begins, which was a crime novel, which is now being adapted and is now in the podcast as a story, as an audio story. But horror is something I've always attempted quite regularly. And the structure of horror writing is not too dissimilar to the structure of writing any fiction or any novel. But in terms of what I'm doing now, I follow more of a movie structure, a screenplay structure in the podcast versus a story structure. And the way it works is that it's two layers, I suppose, when you talk about horror and how the ideas come about. It's the layer of the story, wherein you have a character who's living a normal existence, who's, is set in their ways. Something happens to them that pushes them out of that comfort zone. They have to go on a journey and transform or perish, or transform and ascend as a better human being. And that's the end of that story. So it's got that story level of it. And then you layer the horror of it, which is finding the discomfort. So let's take the first season of Fear FM, for example. So you have a man, Prakash, who's lost his job in the US. He's come home and he is yearning to go back to do that work so he can avoid looking after his sick mother, because he's got a fraught relationship with her. They've got bad blood in their history, but it's the recession. He's trapped in this home. He's depressed. He doesn't want to engage with society. And then something terrible comes into their lives. And he's forced into confronting who he is. And the way horror works is throwing that element at that person. And that takes the form of a monster, but the monster is really their own flaws. In Prakash's case, it's his inherent ability to go back and look at the past and say, was this truly that happened between me and my family? How am I treating my mother now? And I'm talking about all these responsibilities and the money that my foreign IT company can give me. But what about my responsibility as a son? What about my wider responsibility to my culture? That takes the form of this monster called the Dakin, who then terrorizes these people. And him and his mother and the supernatural investigator named Ektaji have to go on this journey to find a solution to bring down this demon and triumph in the end. And they have this character growth. So it's really those two layers. And I hope I've explained that properly.
Yeah, see, like it's very interesting when you told us about this. Like you take like normal conflicts, like which people have in their daily lives, and you add that layer of horror to it. That's how it works, basically,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
Wow.
And at the end of it, the personal troubles have to be more horrifying than the monster, because the monster and the personal thing have merged together. Let me give you a classic example. Have you both seen The Shining?
I have watched like half of it, not the whole.
Half of it. You must watch the entire thing. Shining is incredible. So in The Shining, if people have watched it, that I'm not going to give away too many spoilers. It's a writer who's taking his family to a hotel which is haunted, and terrible events happen there. That movie, that story, even in the novel, is really, sure, there is a supernatural hotel, there are ghosts, but that's really about Stephen King's worry about what he might have done to his children when he had an alcohol problem. So he was worried that when he was an alcoholic, he was going to hit his children and damage them in some way. And it's really tapping into that fear. And that is the real horror in that, not the ghosts, not the hotels, but then the two merge together in such a way that elementally you understand. Human beings understand this is at a deeper level. What the manifestation of the ghost actually means. A recent hit, Babadook, which an incredible movie, if you get a chance to watch. It's a woman and her son. She's a single mother going through depression, living in a house. They open this box. This demon comes out. Really, that story is about the struggle of single mothers without support, having to go through child rearing, which is a difficult process, not a terrible process. It's a difficult process, and having no support, especially in an insular society that we live in, and the terror of having to lead with depression, tied in with those personal responsibilities, and how those two people triumph, in that scenario.
Right, I think Exorcist also falls along those lines, right? I mean, it's almost a similar lines where a single mother is taking care of her daughter, who's becoming a teenager, and there are some issues with she faces when she starts seeing other men, and the daughter doesn't approve of it. And that's the premise which the author has set up there.
I'm really glad you brought that up, because if you get a chance, do watch The Exorcist, but do read the novel. The Exorcist.
We have an excellent story about how we watched Exorcist. That was one of the most terrifying experiences of our life, and probably that is the reason that we stopped watching horror movies altogether as well. So if I may, I'll take 5 minutes and explain what happened. So I think this was early 2000s.
2002.
Yeah, sometime circa 2002 or something. I think we were both in school at that time, and I had this very close friend of mine who stayed around, let's say, 10 kilometers from our house. This is back in Kerala, okay?
Yeah.
And he was a movie buff. Whenever he comes, we watch a lot of movies and stuff, mostly a Bollywood stuff.
It was a time of DVDs, you get good quality videos.
Yeah, exactly. So he was a big Shah Rukh Khan fan, and we ended up watching a lot of Shah Rukh. So what happened is our exams were over. We were both sitting, there is nothing much to do in those days, no phones, computers and stuff like that, right? So we were getting bored. And we spoke with this friend of mine, and he said, why don't you guys come over to my place and stay for a couple of days, and we'll watch a lot of movies. We went over, we watched a lot of movies and stuff, and I have heard about Exorcist being the most, the greatest horror movie from my cousins and my friends. So when we went to the DVD shop, I suggested that, hey, I've heard this movie is like crazy, horrifying movie. Why don't we watch it? Since we have three of us together, right? If it was, was alone, I would never, because I don't even want to know what is there in it.
Yeah.
So what we did, we bought the DVD, came home, had a nice dinner. His family went to sleep, and we decided that we'll start watching the movie only at 12 o'clock.
Yeah.
Right.
Great.
Just to add atmosphere and all that, we switched off all the lights. We were in the first floor, so we opened the window. There was a tree outside which cast a shadow inside in the kitchen and all. So it was completely spooky, and we wanted it to be as spooky as possible, just to add to the to the
atmosphere. Yeah.
Right. So we created that atmosphere. Everything was silent. Then we started watching the movie. And you have watched the movie, and you know what would have happened. So there were some scenes which were like so crazy, and vividly remember the moment the movie got over. Three of us were just petrified in our seats. We were not able to move at all.
Yeah.
We were looking at each other. We were like, "What next?" And I wanted to pee so badly,
Actually, we
man.
three wanted to pee.
Yeah, and the bathroom is a flight of stairs down, and you have to go down, and it's like a spooky. There is no light. That was one of the most scared I've ever felt watching something.
We were in the living room, right? We were watching it in the living room, and the kitchen was right next to it, and there
Yeah.
were this polythene covers, right? So
Yeah.
because of the fan from the living room, the polythene covers started making this noise, like
Yeah.
that
And you remember the scene where her head turns around and there's this weird sound. I think I heard they got Oscar for that sound effect where they put credit cards in a leather wallet and twisted it, which made that
Right.
clicking sound of phones or something like that, right? So
Wow.
some kind of similar sound. And when you're scared, you start hearing a lot more than what actually there, actually there, right? And
this is
to
tying
overcome
back to
that-
something we were talking about before about when you watch that movie, and this would have been the same effect of telling stories around a campfire for early human beings. It raises your levels of alertness, so you become super alert to things that you need to be wary of. So that's something that's manifesting in what you're saying. But sorry to interrupt you, but please carry on.
Yeah, I think that's it. Then we decided.
So we basically three of us went together to the washroom, and we took turns. The other two would stand outside the door.
Yeah.
And that's how we peed.
That's how scared.
Hilarious.
And to overcome that, I think we watched E.T. or something afterwards.
God. I mean, that's creepy. That's a creepy movie in itself. That creature's so creepy. So I don't know if that was a good choice, but that's incredible. I mean, the thing is, if you get a chance, please read the novel, because the novel has this added layer which makes it even more terrifying, which I think it stayed with me for so long that it's crept into some of my work as well. Because it's not included in the movie, obviously, because it would increase the runtime. The priest who goes to perform the exorcism, the younger priest, his mother is in an old age home. And he has all this guilt about her being in the old age home. And it's an amazing book because that amplifies the terror. As he's dealing with this girl and he's reading with his personal guilt, which is his true existential horror, his inability to sacrifice himself for his mother, that really amplifies the terror. Exorcist, such a great movie, such a great book, and I'm not surprised that you had that experience.
So I have watched horror books for that, but always with during the daytime or with my cousins and brother and or friends or something. But this was the first one where I knew that it was horror, and we created a scenario where an atmosphere of more creepiness, and it delivered the punch. That's what I would say. And
That's right.
and it gave me what I expected, but maybe a little more than I was prepared for.
Talking about delivering punch, I was going to talk about this a bit later. Actually, we will talk about this a bit later when we talk about horror in India. That delivering the punch aspect is crucial to a lot of stories. And I've got some examples from stories in India where that happens. But I think now is a good point to answer your question from before, Shankar, about how I came upon the scenario with the two of you. I mean, obviously, from engaging with your podcast and also your website, I had some hints about your personalities and how you were. But I think we had a conversation at one stage. I think it was with you, Shankar, where there was some throwaway line about the traffic in your city. And I thought and you were complaining about it. And I thought to myself, what's the best thing that could happen to these guys? And in the journey of the best thing happening to these guys, what's the worst thing that could happen to these guys? And that was exactly the structure of it. You are freed from the traffic, the congested confines of your city. Both of you are traveling on this bike, having a jolly good time. One of you has to pee, and you get off at this forest that's this freedom and clean air and open, and you get butchered. So that was essentially
it's like you push the characters to the peak on one side, make them feel all make them feel euphoria, and all of a sudden something happens so bad that they
it's like the price you pay for freedom.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah, that's right. I mean, look, this is true with we will talk about this when we talk about movies. Every era has its boogeyman or boogie situation. But what you just explained is the distillation of that. Yeah. So when you get excess of something, then, you tell people, but you need to fear that. You see that a lot. And when we talk about how, for example, the fear of technology has been portrayed in movies, we will explore that a bit more. But I think now is a good time for people to listen to that episode where both of you get squished.
Right. So we'll play the clip of that episode where we both of us are the characters in the amazing story. So we will lead you into the story right now. You can listen to it and come back to this discussion probably a lot more scared than what you actually are right now.
Brilliant.
Shankar and Vishnu were on their way to an audio production conference. They were from the neighboring city, and the only way to get to their destination was the road that cut through Narakaranya forest. As usual, Vishnu could barely keep his attention on the road thanks to Shankar's constant stream of interesting factoids, stories of recent romantic conquests, and just plain rubbish. Occasionally, he broke into a song from a latest blockbuster. The integrity of the piece compromised by the windshield on his half-face helmet and his attempts at improvising. "Did you know that cats don't taste sweet, but dogs taste salty?" Shankar said. "What? I don't even want to know how you gained this knowledge," Vishnu responded. "Yep, it's true." Vishnu chuckled. Protestations aside, he wouldn't know what to do without his crazy brother, who had rambled all his life and kept them entertained through many a motorcycle journey. They were thinking of starting a podcast called The Motorcycle Diaries to capture the precious and hilarious rants they engaged in. The name wasn't original, but hey, you gotta start somewhere. Vishnu braked and pulled over the bike. "What the hell is wrong with you, man? Late afternoon haunted forest?" Shankar said. "I gotta pee, man, and I'm sure the haunted forest wouldn't mind some uric acid to fertilize its soil," Vishnu said. "You, yuck, that's a tad too descriptive for my taste," Shankar said. "Do me a favor, please. Don't use taste and urine in the same sentence. Please," Vishnu said as he hopped off the bike. He walked into the woods where he could still see the bike and his brother and the road. But people passing by couldn't see him relieving himself. Unlike his brother, he had a sense of shame. "I mean, seriously though, what do you think about the crazy stories they tell about this forest?" Shankar asked. "I don't believe in supernatural rubbish," Vishnu said. "I have told you so many crazy, unbelievable but true factoids over the years. Ghosts could be true too. Maybe you are pissing on one right now," Shankar said. "Shut the fuck up. I can't pee properly if you keep talking," Vishnu said. "I mean, technically, you're more likely to get bitten by a snake than see a ghost around here. Did you know 46,000 people die from snake bites every year in India?" Shankar said. "Stop that shit. You are freaking me out," Vishnu said, looking around to check if there was a poisonous serpent headed his way. The forest was suddenly unnaturally quiet. Even Shankar, who never stopped blabbering, had gone silent. Vishnu zipped his pants and turned round, half expecting his brother to be standing behind him with a vine or a stick, pretending it was a snake he had wrestled into submission. Instead, his brother was nowhere to be seen. In fact, he couldn't see the road or the bike, It was as if he was suddenly transported to another part of the forest with an unending row of trees. "Shankar? Shankar!" he called out. He walked towards the trees where his bike should have been. There was nothing there. He caught a movement to his left. His brother was standing still, facing away from him. "Shankar!" he called out. No response. Vishnu walked towards his brother slowly. He felt the forest pulsing with evil intent. When he reached him, Vishnu touched Shankar on the shoulder. No movement. Suddenly, Shankar brought his arms up to his face, and Vishnu heard the most disgusting of sounds. "What the?" he said, as he forcefully grabbed Shankar's shoulders and turned him around. Shankar was clawing at his face. In fact, he had ripped off half of his left cheek, exposing the ragged flesh left behind, the gums, the teeth, and the tongue covered in gore. "No! No!" Vishnu screamed. "Stop it!" Shankar, who was now clawing at the other side of his face, halted his actions abruptly. He was staring at something past Vishnu, something behind him. The beginnings of a sick smile made the hole in his left cheek bigger. Shankar started clapping. Vishnu turned around slowly, with dread. A mob of shadowy figures had emerged from the forest. The absence of light defined the beings whose forms were like pitch-black tears in the fabric of reality. They approached him, whispering at an inhuman pace. Before Vishnu could will his legs to run, they wrestled him down to the forest floor. He squirmed and cried on the wet leaves, crushing them underneath him. The creatures held him down. Shankar was in a frenzy, clapping and shouting joyfully. "Glory! Glory to the Master of Shadows!" The soundtrack of his madness merging with the sounds of the forest. The shadows gathered stones and wood from the forest. They stood over him now, holding up the primitive weapons, ready to attack. Vishnu sensed their demonic desires like a crushing weight on his chest. His body was paralyzed. Their iron grip made it impossible to escape. The first stab from the sharp end of a stick punctured his right eyeball. Before he could process the pain from it, a rock crushed his skull in. Then something punctured his lungs. His kneecaps shattered next. With each strike, they reduced his body to a form that would make identification a difficult process. All the while, Shankar danced and clapped and tore away at his own flesh, till he too was a primordial heap of gore.
All right, so we hope that you enjoyed the clip, and do let us know what you felt about it, and we'll get back to the discussion that we were earlier. So, Nikesh, let's move on.
Yeah, but just before we go further, the first time you heard that episode, what were your feelings? And I'm asking about the immediate reaction. You were listening to it, and you'd finished. Like, what did you feel?
Okay, my experience, I was really impressed by the way you had evaluated our characters. First of all, not going to the horror part right now. Because I think that would be in a parallel universe, that would be a conversation that we would have probably had, right? The personalities are strikingly similar to what we actually are,
Yeah.
right? Shankar being a little more playful and all that, and me being
Not that playful, but yeah.
yeah, and myself being a little grumpy and all that kind of stuff. Not always, but sometimes
always
we do get into that kind of conversations as well. So I was really impressed by that, and I was really curious to see how wrong can this day go. And especially when the horror element started, right? You really painted a picture, because I usually listen to these kind of stories with my eyes closed so that I can imagine whatever you're just saying, right? So I have that picture painted clear in my mind.
Yeah.
Every single detail, the way you say, the bike, the helmet, in the story that happens before, when they say while going in the bus, they see the two helmets and stuff like that, right?
Yeah.
That itself gave me a little bit of expectation as to what would have gone wrong.
Yeah.
Then you mentioned about going into the forest and parking there, that spookiness that starts growing into you, right? And especially when you mentioned about Shankar facing towards opposite side and Vishnu trying to understand what's happening, he being very silent, and then you look at him and him clawing at his face. I remembered a scene from a movie. I think it was I don't know if it was Grudge.
Mirror?
I think it was Grudge, in which there's this Japanese girl who's walking down the stairs and a lot of blood is coming out. A guy calls out his name and she turns around. She doesn't have the jaw.
Yeah.
And her tongue hanging down and stuff like. And that scene was something that scared me for a long time. Not just a scare. I was like, I kept on thinking about it for a long time after I watched the movie.
Right. Yeah.
And it was absolutely in the same ballpark, where I kept thinking about that scene so much, and especially the other part where I was getting killed, completely torn apart and all that. And the interesting part is, when you're watching a movie, it's a different character, and here you have already put yourself in that position where you are living through the story, right? And it really fascinated me to think about, what if something like that really happens? How would I react, or what would I do? Would I just look at my brother and see him killing himself, and would I take the bike and run away, or would I stay back to kind of save him? So those kind of questions started coming into my mind.
Yeah. Wow, this is getting deep.
Yeah.
So I started questioning myself, in such a situation, would I value my life, or would I stay back to try and revive my brother from whatever he's going.
Wow.
And you know what? I mean, we can laugh. Yeah, we can laugh about this, but people react in extremely different ways in the face of trauma. Like when you go into shock, a lot of people have no control over how they behave.
That's right. I mean, who is to? I was just trying to see. It's difficult for us to imagine what we would do, because we don't know. We are not in this situation yet. But it made me think a lot about what relationships are, and what is the motivation for you to give up your life for someone else. Right?
Wow.
Would you value your life less than someone else's life, be it your brother, be it your significant other, be it your mother, or whatever? So it went into all those deep kind of thoughts for me. That is my experience.
I have succeeded as a writer. And what about you, Shankar?
That's like so deep. I've listened to it like a few times, but the first time I listened to it, my reaction was plain and simple. To be honest, I was really happy to die that way. And I was laughing my heart out,
Yeah.
By the end of it was like, my reaction was, even I was surprised. I'm getting killed, but I'm so happy. I don't know why.
Exactly.
It was like Vishnu said, okay. It was like the polar opposite of what he said.
So I think that also reflects on our personalities a little bit, right? I mean, when presented the same situation, how do you think about it? And I think at least in my case, you have really hit a chord somewhere by that narrative. I was like starting to question about your integrity and the
Yeah, yeah,
relationship and that kind
yeah.
of stuff. And I did forward this, this episode to a few of my friends as well. And I got very, very, and most of them were really horrified. I think more because they are listening to their friend getting killed or something, and it's more than the horror of how it was done. It was about, oh, you know what? How could someone do this to you? Kind of a
Yeah.
thing.
Yeah, yeah. And look, that's I'm really glad you raised that point, because this is where horror becomes a superior genre to other genres. Because other genres, like let's say a spy thriller, like a heist movie, who's going to go on a heist? Not many people. Most of us are not going to be spies, but we will have at some stage have to lose someone we know. So I have had friends who have died in terrible accidents. And this is particular aspect you're talking about. You live through it. At least once in your life, some of these issues that you're exploring in horror will happen to you. You will endure it. You will suffer the pain of it. You will feel the terror of it for months and months and months. I remember when one of my distant cousins died. This is a crazy story behind this, by the way, and I don't believe in astrology and things like that, but this is a really crazy story.
Well, I'm afraid we have to cut this short right now, and we will listen to Nikesh's interesting story in the next episode. We have a lot more coming up. Do keep listening to us. And before I wind this up, I want to thank everybody who's a part of the podcast meetup we had earlier this month. Thank you so much for coming in. And my special thanks to Sangram, who's been our supporter since a long time. Thank you, Sangram, for coming over and showing us your support and love. And I hope you start your podcast soon. So thank you so much for listening to this episode. Keep waiting for the next episode. We are going to conclude this conversation. And as always, see you soon.